Hi everyone, my name is Shauna, in case you don't know, and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be a very serious topic and it is going to be a bit of a rant, but I do want to start off by addressing something really quickly. You see my neck? You see right there? Yeah, they're red, they're rashy. I have skin issues that I think are connected to POTS, but there's a chance that it could be connected to mast cell activation syndrome, which I have suspicions that I have, but I've never been tested properly for it. And basically, I changed my face wash because the store that I went to did not have my face wash, and now this happened, and I'm suspecting it's the face wash, could be something different, but whatever. I just wanted to address it in case anyone has any questions, but I'm fine. It's just my skin issues flaring up. Anyways, now that that's addressed, let's talk about the topic of today's video. But before we get into it, I want to clarify that there are trigger warnings for this video. Specifically, the trigger warnings are depression, PTSD, suicide, and dissociative identity disorder, and OCD. I think that's all. There's a chance there may be something else, but if there is, check the description, and the description will have a full list of all the trigger warnings. Today I want to talk about mental health representation in media, and specifically how mental health representation in media fails people with mental health issues and actually can sometimes exacerbate mental health problems. A little disclaimer about myself: I have depression, anxiety, OCD, PTSD, and I also struggle with dissociation, though I haven't been diagnosed with any dissociation disorder. My therapist is under the impression that it is caused by high levels of stress, and it is also caused as a result of my PTSD. So I have a lot of experience with being diagnosed with these things. I also have experience of therapy. I have been in therapy since I was 14. I am currently 24, nearly 25. So I have been in therapy for basically 10 years, and I have discussed these topics in detail with my therapist because I am very disturbed by representation in media, and representation in media also has had a huge impact on my mental health. So the first little thing I want to address is, you saw how I did trigger warnings for this video. Most media does not have adequate trigger warnings, and that is a problem because depictions of things like depression and PTSD can be very triggering for people, and being triggered by these things could result in lots of spirals. It could result in depression spiking again. It could also result in people potentially starting to engage in harmful behaviors that are attributed to their depression and their mental health problems. I have a lot of triggers. I'm not gonna pretend that I don't have triggers. I have experienced trauma in my past, and I have triggers as a result of that. And what happens for me when I'm engaging with the media and there is a trigger in there that I'm not yet ready to handle, because with therapy you can get to the point where sometimes you can handle engaging in content related to your triggers. So what happens when I read books with my triggers in it and I'm not prepared is that I have an increase in my depression and sometimes an increase in my flashbacks. Now, being triggered looks different for every person, and the amount of time that you remain triggered and struggling after seeing your trigger varies from person to person. An example of a media for me, for example, that triggered me was, there is a book called Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter, and there's also a book called Into the Water by Paula Hawkins. I was reading both of those books at the same time for two different book clubs. Into the Water involves discussion of suicide and sexual assault, things that I have experienced in my life. I have known people who have passed due to suicide, and I have been assaulted. Now, Pretty Girls involves graphic depictions of girls being raped, and also there is discussion of suicide in there as well. So suicide and sexual assault, these two things. I was reading the books at the same time too, which definitely did not help things. I experienced a flare-up of my depression. I was reading these two books and could not figure out why my depression was flaring, why I was struggling so much, why I would wake up each day feeling so sad and depleted and feeling like I had no energy to do anything and function. And I kept feeling so paranoid that people were going to do things to me, and I couldn't figure out where this was coming from. It came from the media that I was reading because the books didn't have adequate trigger warnings. And this happens a lot, but these are the two books that I was impacted by the most because I was like reading them both at the same time with two different book clubs. I had to quit reading both of them, and it haunts me that there is now two books that I have not finished because I have this thing with my brain where I have to finish every book that I start, and it haunts me that I didn't finish those two books. But I also reached a point where I'm like, I have to take care of myself, and I can't keep triggering myself and causing my depression to flare up because of books that I'm reading. Books are supposed to be read for fun unless you're reading them for school, so yeah. Now, on the topic of Pretty Girls also used a lot of triggering topics as shock factors. I cannot stand that, and I think that triggering subjects should only be put in media if they're being put in media to raise representation and to respectfully discuss the topics. Using them as a shock factor is not a respectful way to address the topic. A lot of horror movies put in like suicide and put in rape and things for a shock factor. That is not an appropriate way to address those problems in media, and it's gross that writers use actual trauma that people have experienced as a shock factor. Sometimes triggering subjects can also be thrown into media in order to joke and make jokes, and that is something that irks me too. You shouldn't be making light of an extremely serious and triggering subject. For example, Bungo Stray Dogs. I read the first volume recently. It is a very poor handling of suicide attempts and depression. Another way that mental health problems are presented in media that causes a lot of problems is by glorifying and romanticizing mental health issues, specifically depression. This happens a lot more in media than you think. If you are presenting suicide as a means to be like, hey, look at all these positive or romantic things that happen as a result of the person killing themselves, you are glorifying and romanticizing suicide. That is just the way that it is. Glorifying and romanticizing mental health problems, specifically in regards to depression and suicide, can lead to increased rates of suicide and depression. I've talked about this in detail with my therapist. So writers who glorify and romanticize suicide have to be aware that their actions have consequences and real people's lives could be damaged as a result of it. I'm very strict when it comes to media if it glorifies or romanticizes suicide in any way. I am extremely strict about that, and I will not back down on that. I have had people push me on that. I have had people get upset with me and say, but it's representation. Not all representation is good representation. We need to get rid of this mindset of, this book has mental health representation. It's good. No, it's not good. If mental health representation is presented in a harmful way, then it is doing more harm than good. And it is better if there's not that representation in the media. Representation in the media for mental health problems is so important, but not at the extent of glorifying and romanticizing mental health problems. Another thing that I'm very firm on is that some movies and books villainize mental health problems. I think we need to also stop villainizing mental health problems. We can identify that some mental health problems do have risks that happen. Sometimes some mental health problems do have people at risk of harming other people, but we shouldn't be villainizing mental health issues in media. And you may think that this only applies to things like dissociative identity disorder. It does not. It does not apply to only things like dissociative identity disorder. It also applies to things like PTSD. For example, there is a movie with Shia LaBeouf in which PTSD is villainized, and the plot twist is that his PTSD is making him kill people. That is such harmful representation. We should be aware that certain conditions do come with some risks, but we also shouldn't be villainizing mental health conditions. When we villainize people with mental health conditions to the point that people are scared of certain people with mental health conditions, we're reaching the point where the people with mental health conditions aren't being treated as humans, and they also may be losing connections and have people pull away from them as a result of their mental health problems. Now, people pulling away as a result of someone's mental health problems do happen. It does happen. It happens a ton, and so I'm not saying that people shouldn't do that, because sometimes if people refuse to get help for their mental health problems, or their mental health problems are so severe it causes problems in the relationship, sometimes you gotta pull away and end the friendship. However, people shouldn't be pulling away because certain mental health condition is presented as dangerous in media. I really do not like that, and the hard thing is this is so normalized. Literally, it's so normalized to villainize mental health conditions in media, especially dissociative identity disorder. For example, the movie Split. It's quite literally a movie where a guy kidnaps a girl and he is struggling with dissociative identity disorder, and the dissociative identity disorder is why he does what he does in the show. That is a problem. That is a huge problem. And the final way that mental health problems are oftentimes presented in media that is harmful and problematic that I cannot stand is by stereotyping different mental health conditions. I've noticed this a lot with OCD. I have been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. And while there is some truth to the fact that people with OCD do sometimes have compulsions related to cleanliness, that is not the only thing about it. And it's gotten to the point where people don't even truly understand what OCD is because they only see representations in the media about cleanliness. As someone with OCD, none of my compulsions have anything to do with cleanliness. I have a whole video on OCD that will be linked down in the description below, But when we are stereotyping mental health conditions, it makes it so people don't understand the mental health conditions at all. And one of the reasons that I'm very passionate about this is because sometimes after shows or media come out that don't handle mental health appropriately, especially depression and suicide and suicidal ideation, there has been an increase of people who are being admitted into inpatient programs. I'll link a article down below in the description about this topic because it's something that I'm very passionate about. I can't even mention the name of the show that I'm specifically like referring to with the article that I'm going to link down below in the description because it is a personal trigger of mine that is too extreme that I can't handle. But yeah, so I'm very passionate about this topic of mental health. I also have one caveat though that I want to clarify with people, and I want to make this explicitly and abundantly clear. I believe people can like problematic media if they call out the problematic elements in the media. So I'm not saying that you're a bad person or that you're doing anything wrong for liking media with problematic representation of mental health. I'm just saying call it out. Call it out. There's no harm in saying, I love this media, here is what's wrong with this media though. There is no problem with that. I have to wrap up this video now because I'm running out of phone storage, and also because my senior dog keeps barking because she wants me to go hang out with her. So I feel like I covered the majority of the points that I wanted to discuss for today's video. I could rant about this a lot longer. I feel like there can and should be mental health representation in media. I just think that a lot of media handles mental health really poorly. I'm someone who's a creative person. I want to be an author someday. I have been writing books, and I understand that sometimes it can be really easy to just toss in mental health and just not fully flesh it out and address the realities of it. But I think with things like sensitivity readers and with doing a lot of research, I think we can avoid problematic representation of mental health in media. I also think there is ways that we should be handling villains in media a little differently. I don't know if we're ever going to get to a point where it is handled completely perfectly in media, where we'll get to a point where no villains are classified mainly by their mental health condition. However, I feel like there is room for growth, and I feel like we as a society should improve the ways that we handle mental health in media. So that was all of my little rant for today. It was a very serious one, and I'm so sorry about that. My next video, I promise you, is not going to be very serious. If you have thoughts on mental health representation in media, feel free to leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. And if there's any media that you think is a terrible handling of mental health, that's also an opportunity to discuss it down in the comment section below. I hope that this video at least gets the conversation started about mental health representation in media and things that should change with how the representation currently is in media. Anyways, my next video is going to be a much lighter one, I promise you, and so until next time everyone, goodbye.